Well, hey guys, Louie here, and yes, you'll have to wait for it. You know why? Because the gears of the system turn slowly. And let me show you what I mean. Before I do, this beautiful copper bar was made by Dixie Silver Miner. I'll put a link to his channel if you want to buy some beautiful silver or copper art. But I enjoy this piece, and it reminds me how slowly the gears turn. So when it comes to your silver and gold, you might have to wait for it. But don't worry, because waiting for it will usually produce a very good result. Here we have a graph of the purchasing power of the US dollar. This chart began in 1900, where the dollar, $100 was worth $100, 100%. And as you can see, through the years, we had steady decline in the purchasing power, which is defined as the change in the CPI over time. That is the government issued CPI numbers. And of course they don't measure everything, and they don't measure everything well, but even this chart using government statistics will show you that the purchasing value of the US dollar only does one thing. It falls and falls and falls and falls. Now, of course, there was a blip in the 30s when FDR confiscated gold in the early 30s and then immediately reset the price. He increased the value of the gold that the U.S. government was holding. All right, and you could see that we had a blip up right after that of the purchasing power of the US dollar. But keep in mind, there was worldwide recession at that point. So I believe you're seeing the effects of deflation during the Great Depression there. And of course, the New Deal kicked in, and the dollar dropped steadily from $60 down to, well, let's go forward. It dropped from 60 to 40 to 30 to 20. It was about the time that the purchasing value of the dollar, 22 cents on the dollar from 1900, the spending that had occurred throughout the 60s, late 60s, and going into the 70s, especially on the Vietnam War, caused the rest of the world to worry that we were going to spend ourselves into oblivion, and they wanted to redeem their gold, and they continued to do so as the dollar and the debt was still redeemable for gold, at the point that Richard Nixon realized that he could no longer sustain the gold appetite for the world and delinked the dollar to gold. All right, untethered the system in the early 70s. Now, this chart, you can't really see it, but from that point forward, where the dollar was worth about $20, it only took about 10 years for it to drop in half in value. Okay, in 1970, the national debt was 371 billion. By 1980, it had gone up, about 150% to 908 billion. All right, so one thing that is clear is national debt rises. All right, and there was an appetite for the U.S. national debt, and we were able to sell those bonds even after we delinked the dollar from gold. But one thing that is for sure is the value, the purchasing value, purchasing power of the US dollar, it drops. It really only drops. Okay, over this point in time, of course, gold became more valuable. And my point here is that sometimes you just have to wait for it. You know, in the case of FDR's gold confiscation, the New Deal created a great deal of spending, and it took a little while for that reality to kick in. But eventually, the dollar did begin to drop again. So I think we're probably in a period, kind of a hybrid between the FDR period and the Nixon period, where the deficit is out of control. I mean, in 1983, the debt was about 1.4 And of course, Reagan liked to spend as well on defense. So spending continued to increase. The only thing that brought parity back into the currency system was when Volcker raised interest rates to 20%. That's how we got a handle on the hyperinflation and the stagflation that was occurring at that time. But I don't know if we will ever see rates that high again, because now with the national debt over 20 trillion and with no limit on the debt, there's no doubt in my mind that the debt is going to continue to increase. Of course, the strength of the dollar is as compared to a basket of currencies, but the rest of the world is really quite weak and getting weaker. So, why would you want to hold dollars? Okay, why would you want to hold dollars during the New Deal, for example? Although, if you held gold, FDR labeled you a hoarder. All right, you were unpatriotic. You were scum of the earth. You were an enemy of the state for not wanting to see the purchasing power of your dollar decrease. He persisted with that for that thought persisted for a long time until they legalized the owning of gold again, long after Nixon had delinked the dollar to gold. The U.S.'s desire to spend on debt and fuel economic growth through debt was very clear to the rest of the world. And this is why the world was cashing in their gold prior to the 70s. All right? But it's clear the slope of this line is down. And you can't really see towards the end, ending in 2010, where a dollar is worth $3.48. I'm sorry, where $100 is worth $3.48. You can't see how significant these drops are, but as the spending increases, without a doubt, the purchasing power of the dollar decreases. Now the Fed has an annual goal of 2% CPI, which that's definitely the target alone will guarantee a devaluation of the dollar. So if you're holding gold and silver, I don't think the day-to-day fluctuations should concern you very much, because they may not allow the move to happen rationally over time, but the spring gets coiled and coiled and coiled until finally it releases, and we have these moves like we saw recently in silver, 40% move or so from $14 up to $19.50. Those are the moves that it's just the spring being allowed to decompress. So should you continue to hold gold and silver? Well, I see nothing in our future that leads me to believe that debt is going to be contained. Of course, we added quantitative easing to this scenario during the Great Recession, and now we continue to add quantitative easing with the Fed stepping in at every turn to try to support the liquidity in the world, where people are holding the liquidity instead of using it. It doesn't matter how much money you borrow, even if you borrow it at 0%, if you can't create something with it. And the economy just does not have the ability to absorb more debt. There's only so many Starbucks that they can open. There's only so many new IPOs. And of course, wages have not kept up with the devaluation of the dollar. Let's see, when I went to work, I won't go into that. But clearly, minimum wage, for example, has not kept up with the devaluation of the dollar, such that you can't even afford an apartment. You certainly can't afford. The average person can't afford a house, at least in a blue state. And this is going to continue. I have no doubt that the dollar will be devalued at probably the highest rate we have ever seen. We currently have no debt limit. We currently have political desires outweighing common sense and restraint. And there are so many things that that can continue the plummet of the purchasing power, at least in America, of the U.S. dollar. And here we are at a point where, in the political cycle, where we really also have to be concerned about the politics changing the nature of spending. Now, right now, we have some of the lowest taxes we've had ever, both corporate and individual, with a conservative administration that is also spending wildly. But as we move more to a liberal government, and I think we will move further across that line to the left. Why? Because most of the money was retained at the top during the new Trump deal. I mean, the estate taxes were removed on multimillionaires. Corporations were allowed to buy their stock back and therefore inflate their stock and increase their personal wealth through stock options, etc. You're just not paying as much if you are in the multimillionaire category. So, but the little guy, minimum wage goes up $1 and rent goes up $500. That's their experience. Education, is unaffordable for many people. And even though they're financing it through student loans, very very unaffordable, and the student loans create a burden on the person for the first 10-20 years of their career. So the little guy really isn't getting much of a break. I'd say entrepreneurs probably are benefiting if you have a small business and you're able to take advantage of those corporate tax rates. But the average person is not really seeing the benefit of all the free money, all the low money. For that reason, I think we will be moving to the left. I think there will be higher taxes in the future, as we saw with the GE announcement. Even the good jobs, right? The jobs that were considered, the best jobs, best blue collar jobs in the world. They're gutting the pension plans and bringing everything back to its lowest common denominator. There are layoffs occurring presently all over the country. And you can see that the economy is faltering, right? So I think that is going to push people to the left, and I think if that happens on Trump's watch, a lot of people are put out of work on Trump's watch, even though he could take credit for putting many of them to work. I think he will also get the blame for them losing their jobs. And then, as the national debt balloons, he'll also take the fall for that. And he would deserve the fall for that, for inflating the national debt to the sky. It's one of the worst expansion periods we've ever seen of national debt. And quantitative easing isn't helping either. So I don't know why we should worry that much about holding gold and silver. Seems to me that we are quickly approaching a period where the government is going to highly discourage holding any tangible assets. I mean, inflation itself, the CPI itself, almost requires that people take their money and put it into the system, into the stock market, buy things with it. Because if you don't, your dollar will be worth less in 10 years. It could even be worth 50% less Of course, the biggest crime here is what this will do to senior citizens and the baby boomers who thought that they had their retirement nest egg set, and we'll soon find out that that will not sustain them. Of course, the left-leaning government will always have another plan to help low-income people, help slash enslave poorer people. But all of this is inflationary. I don't fear it. I just think that you have to wait for it. It's not a day-to-day thing. It is, but it is a proven fact that the dollar devalues. And it is also proven that you do not want to hold dollars in your mattress. You don't want you want to put those dollars to work for you. And I know it can be a little bit of a challenge to take those out of the stock market and put those dollars into precious metals. But clearly, earning 0% on your money and then losing 2% or greater, is not a wise thing to do. So, what do you think? Do you fear holding precious metals at these prices? Do you think that there could be a halving of the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar again? Do you think that worldwide recession, will bring about more spending programs from the U.S. government as they try to prop up this aging market we have here? I don't see virtually any scenario where the dollar would strengthen over time. I just don't think it's in the cards. What do you guys think? Thanks.